Hello. Today I'm going to make a simple video on how to use GIMP to create combined graphics and also buttons that you could use in Canvas. When I look at this Canvas site here, I get a lot of questions from people about, well, how do you make these graphics, or even these buttons that we have that navigate to the various parts of the site, and that they're all the same size and there's a nice consistent flow to it. You can use any graphic as a button in Canvas, but the problem with any graphic is they're not going to be sized properly. They're not all going to be the same size, and when you try to stick them into a table or stick them into your web page somewhere, you run into a really tough time trying to get them to all look consistent. So I always like to make my graphics an exact size to begin with and know what I want to work with. And then these are all put into a table. If I were to go in to edit this web page, you can see that all of these buttons are actually placed in a table, and when you place that button into the table with no spaces, and you don't worry about having to try to resize this graphic, they're all going to turn out really nice. And then if you have a button selected, you could use your links to another page or to another website, wherever you want to go. So I'm going to go over how do we create some basic graphics in GIMP. So first thing I need to do is launch GIMP. GIMP is not installed in your computers. This is something that you will have to install yourself, or try to get a computer technician to install them for you. Right here I already have a button up on the screen that I've used before with GIMP. Now this tutorial is not intended to teach you everything about GIMP. I really encourage you to watch some of the other tutorials, read some tutorials, experiment with the program a little bit, just so that all of what we go over here is going to make better sense for you, but I will try to do through this quickly. Some of the basics of GIMP. When you first launch GIMP, it's going to be a multiple window format. Here's your tool panel of all your basic tools. These would be your layers. With any graphic program like GIMP or Photoshop, you're going to work with layers to try to get things to work correctly, and then you've got your workspace in the middle. The first thing I like to do with GIMP is make it look like every other program out there in the world. I will go to the window pull down menu and I will choose the single window mode option, and that will make GIMP be a single window that I can use to fill my entire screen. Now, in case you ever lose one of these toolbars or one of these docks on the side of your screen, which is very, very easy to do on GIMP, two ways to bring them back. If you go to the window pull down menu, and there is an option here to choose recently closed docks, you may be able to bring them back up with this. If you've just messed up GIMP so badly that you can't even use that feature to bring them back, you can go to the edit pull down menu, go to preferences, and we'll give it a second for preferences to open. And if I go down here to the bottom for window management, there's an option here to reset save window positions to default values. And if you click that, that will take GIMP back to the way that it looked when you first launched it. So that's the way to get it back. So here's my button that I created. Right now it's at 100%. Here's my zoom at the bottom. I could hold down the control key and scroll my mouse wheel to zoom in and out on it. So how big do you make a button? First thing you need to determine is, what do you want to put on that button, and how big does it need to be so that you can fit everything onto that button that you would like to put on that button. You want to decide how many buttons you want going across in a row. I make my Canvas sites 3 buttons wide because that would be about an 800 pixel wide display screen. Most people have their display resolution kicked much higher than that on their computers these days, so everything would be able to display. But every now and then you'll hit a computer that might be tied to a projector that's really low resolution. You might lose some buttons. So the size that I decided for my buttons, if I go to the image pull down menu and go to canvas size, I decided to make most of my buttons 225 pixels wide by 80 pixels high. Okay, and you can change from pixels to percent, inches, but pixels are usually what we work with on web pages. So I'm going to start a brand new button here, a brand new file, just so we can start fresh together. So I opened up GIMP, I go to File and New, and it asks me how big do I want my image to be. This is where I would type in my width of 225 pixels, my height of 80 pixels. There are advanced options. We don't need to get into any of that for what we're trying to do, but here's where you would set the size of your image. Hit OK. I have a new image on my screen. It comes in at 100%. Notice I only have one layer called the background layer, and we have my tools on the side. So let's get started with this. one thing that I probably would like to do with my drawing is I like to put a border on it. So I'm going to use the selection tool to do that. First thing I need to do is create another layer. And the way to try to think of layers in a graphic program is think of them like overhead transparencies that you would stack up. You know, what's going to be above the other. You don't want to put everything on one layer because then it becomes very hard to edit it and make changes to it. So I'm going to go down here at my layer control buttons, and right here would be one to create a new layer. I'll click it. It will automatically set it to the size of what my canvas is, so we'll hit OK. And this will be the layer that I'll use for my border. Okay, so I want to make a border about 4 or 6 pixels wide. So the first thing I could do is I could use this rectangle select tool and drag a window to select everything. A lot of times what I like to do, I'll click out of that, I like to go to the select pull down menu and hit all. And when you get the little marching ants, the line moving around, that means that's your selected area. Again, I encourage you to watch some other videos to know how these selection tools really work. So right now everything is selected. I will go to the select pull down menu and I will shrink it. How far do I want to shrink it? Let's go 5 pixels and hit OK. Now you'll see, I'm going to zoom in on this. I'm going to hit the control key and scroll to zoom in on this. You'll see I have a smaller selection area. Now if I wanted to bucket fill this outer area here to be a border, well, I'm already selected with black. I'll keep it as my black color, but if I wanted to change my foreground color, I could click it and I could choose anything I want to out of this. But I'll keep it at black. Now if I go to the bucket, the problem is that I have to determine what was my selection area. Is it the outside or is it the inside? And if I click, it was the inside area because everything was selected and I shrank it. So I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. What I need to do is I need to invert my selection. So I go to select and I'm going to go to invert. Now the outer area is selected, not the inner area. So if I click there, now I have a border. To get rid of the marching ants, I just need to go to my selection rectangle tool and just click anywhere, and it now makes everything be solid again. So now I have a layer that's just my border. Okay, background layer is just white. Outside layer is just my border only. Now I need to find a graphic. So let's say we're going to make a button that we're just going to say welcome back to school or something like that. Let me go out to the internet and I'll open up a new Google search window and let's just say back to school. So we're going to put a graphic in here and I'll go to images, and you need to find an image that you would like to use on your graphic. I like this first one. You know, we'll just select it. We're going to view image. I'm going to right click and I'm going to copy image. I could save it if I want to use it later on and save it to some place where you can remember where it is and bring it up later, but I'm just going to hit copy image. Okay, let's go back to GIMP. I'm going to go right click, edit, paste. Now, the nice thing about GIMP is when you paste something into it, it comes in as a floating layer selection. I could have also saved that file and gone to the File pull-down menu and told it to open as a layer. Either way works. There's always more than one way to do something. So right now it's a floating layer. I'm just going to hit the New Layer button now to paste it down so it's a normal layer. It's a little large right now. So let me find a scale tool over here out of my scaling or my tool options. Here's the scale tool. I don't want to distort it, shrink it less in one direction than the other. So down here at the bottom of my tool options, and whenever you pick a tool, these tool options down here will change. I'm going to hit the button here that says keep aspect. Okay, so now I can start grabbing this and shrinking it down, and it was a huge image. So we'll hit scale, and here it is. Let's move it up onto the paper again. So I'll move it up here and we'll go to scale again. I could just type in an actual percentage in here, but it might get too small and be hard for me to find it. So we're going to hit scale. Let's bring it back up onto the screen again. Yeah, it's getting pretty small now. Scale it one more time. I'll make it about this big. Scale. We'll move it back up onto my screen, and there's my graphic that I want to use for my button. Okay, so let's see, what do I want to do with it? If I'm going to be consistent with the way that I make all my other buttons, I'm going to go to the rotate command now, and here would be your rotate command. I'm going to rotate it on a little bit of an angle, hit the rotate confirmation button. Now these buttons sometimes pop up over top, these little dialog boxes pop up over top of where you're working. You have to move them. It is a little annoying. Sometimes it will be behind your actual screen, so sometimes you might have to like look down here in your bar to see where that window might be and scale it. We'll hit rotate. Now something's wrong with this image. If you notice, it's covering my border. Well, if I look at my list of layers, this pasted layer is above my border. So I need to drag that layer below my border, and there you go. Now the border's in front of it. So now I can move this to wherever I want to go with it. If it needs to be a little more faint, it needs to be more dim, I could always just go up here in my opacity bar and I could change my opacity for the selected layer. You have to always remember to be on your selected layer. So I could change the opacity of this at any time. This is another benefit of working within layers. So I'll make it about that dark for now. I'm ready for some text. Okay, so I look at my toolbar over here on the left and I go to my text tool. I'm going to drag a text window. Bam. Okay, so now I have a text window. You have some information up here at the top of the screen. Its size, and there you got bold, italicized. You can change some things. You can look at your fonts over here also on the left, and you can choose a lot of different fonts. All the fonts that are available to you for Microsoft Word or anything are going to be here, all of your window fonts. You can even add fonts as you need them. I'm going to keep it on this Flux Architect just because I like that. Okay, I'm going to start typing. So we're going to type in this window. Back, and it's pretty big, to school. Alright, so the text is a little large. Just like Microsoft Word, you have to highlight it. You can play with the size. You can change this text box size if you need to. You have some options of what you can do to change this around to make a nice button. Alright, so what else can I do to this? I don't think bold will work on this. Yeah, I guess bold will work on this font, but I don't like it. And there's some other things you can change here. It's justification, left, right. It's all over here on the left-hand side. Spacing between lines, spacing between letters. You can change a lot of different things with this. Okay, if I like what I have here, I'm just going to click out of the text. I'll pick my move command. A lot of times I like to pick the move command, and that gets you out of the text box. And you'll see the text is on its own layer, the border is on its own layer, and the graphic is on its own layer. Now this looks a little pixely right now, but remember I'm zoomed in at 200%. So we'll zoom back out to 100%, and there's what it would really look like. I'll activate my background layer. There's what it would look like actual size. So we'll zoom back in here again to 200%. Okay, so let me go back to that text. So I have to click on the actual text layer. I'm going to pick my text command. I'm going to highlight it again. And if I wanted to change its color, here's its color swatch. Maybe I want that to be like a darker blue. Now your text is a darker blue. Again, highlight it. Again, make sure the layer is active. Make sure you're in the text tool. That's the only way this is going to work for you. And make sure everything looks really good the way you want to go. We'll go a little bit darker of a blue here. Okay. Now let's say you wanted to put an outline on this text. Okay, we'll go to the move tool right now. So back to school. I just don't like the way that stands out. So maybe I want to put like a nice yellow background onto the text. This is where GIMP gets a little more difficult than, say, Photoshop. We'll go back to my text tool, make sure I'm in the correct layer. We'll highlight my text, and I'm going to right mouse button click on it and choose an option called Path from Text. And what it's going to do is it's going to create a path from my text. Okay, we're going to create a brand new layer. Okay, so again, I went over here, create a new layer. This layer is above my text that I just created. I'm going to put it below my text. Alright, let's go to Select Pull Down Menu, and I'm going to say Path from, or Selection from Path. You'll see a dash line, marching ant line around your text. Let's grow that a little bit. Let's go to Select, and instead of Shrink like we did before, I'm going to choose Grow. And I'm going to grow it by 1 pixel. Okay, so now I've got a little bit bigger. I'm going to change my color here, my foreground color, to like a nice yellow color. I even have a yellow here I've already used, but I'll pick a new one. Hit OK. I'm going to go to the bucket, and I'm going to bucket fill just in that area of yellow. Now I still have that little marching ant line. I need to deselect that area, so I go to the rectangle select tool and just click anywhere. And if you look, I'll zoom in really close, you'll see that there's a little bit of a yellow line around that text now, just to kind of make it stand out a little bit. Now there might be something else we'd want to do. Let me go back to my text layer, back to school, right there's the text layer. Maybe we're going to put a little drop shadow on this to make it stand out too. So we're going to change my colors back to the default black and white, and there's a nice little button to do that. Filters. There are a lot of filters in GIMP. You could read tutorials for weeks just realizing how to use all of these. Underneath filters, I'm going to go to light and shadow, and I'm going to go to the drop shadow option. And what I get is another dialog up here. I wish it would show a preview, but it doesn't. So offset X and Y. So I'm going to put a drop shadow so it's going over 4 pixels and down 4 pixels. It's going to give me a blur radius. I'm just going to keep everything at its default right now. Opacity, how dark it's going to be. I'm just going to hit OK. And it put a nice little gray shadow around my text. I don't like that, so I'm going to Control Z back. And if I go to filters, we're going to re-show my drop shadow. The last filter you use will always show up here at the top. So re-show drop shadow. I'm going to make the blur radius be a little bit smaller and a little less opaque. And now let's see what happens when I hit OK. Okay, so there I have a slightly more intense drop shadow for things. So you can see it in there. There's a slight drop shadow. And if I keep playing with those settings, we'll hit Control Z to undo again. You can hit Control Z as many times as you need to go back. We'll go in here to filters, show drop shadow. A lot of times I don't like this resizing too. Sometimes it'll make your canvas bigger. So you might want to deselect resizing. This time it didn't resize, but sometimes it does. I'm going to make the offset be a little less this time. Let's go 3 pixels. And the blur radius a little bit smaller. We're going to make it more opaque this time. Hit OK, and there you go. You got a more bold drop shadow this time. Let's go back to 100% just to see what this button looks like. The back to school. Zoom in a little bit more. That's a little dark yet, so maybe I'll click on that little pasted layer there, my back to school layer. And we're going to bring the opacity down a bit up here at the top. That looks pretty good. Now, when you save files in GIMP, just like Photoshop, they want to save in their own format that maintains all of the layers. You can't stick a GIMP file, you can't stick a Photoshop file in Canvas or any of your web pages. You have to export them as an image file, either as a PNG or a JPEG file, much like we do when we take pictures with your cell phones these days. You save a JPEG picture. So if I went to File and I went to Save, it's going to save this thing as a .xcf file. That's a Blender, or I'm sorry, that's a Canvas-specific, GIMP-specific file format. Photoshop documents will save themselves as a .psd. Okay, and that will save it that you can go back and work on it and change things later on. But if you're all done with this and say, I like that button the way it is, I'm going to go to File and Export. And by default, GIMP is going to save it as a PNG file. So what I'm going to do right now is just save this onto my desktop as a picture. And I'm just going to say, back to school. .png, leave the extension on there. PNG is a really good picture file format. It's probably the one you want to use most of the time, and it is the default. So I hit save or hit export, and it's probably going to give me an option. How do I want to save it? Don't change anything, just hit export, and you now have a button to work with. If I minimize this, I'm going to open this up. It's going to open that picture up in Windows Photo Viewer. I think. There it is. So there's your graphic, there's your button. You can upload it to your Canvas site, stick it on your Canvas page, and put a hyperlink to it, and you now know how to make some basic buttons. So good luck.